it destroyed everything. People were basically left with what they had on their back or what they were able to grab quickly.
It was just, that first week, even that first day, second day was shock. I think sitting in a building, not at the incident, not seeing paradise, it was hard for any of us to fathom.
When you're talking thousands of houses, thousands of businesses, it is truly like a bomb went off. Driving up that first day and seeing power lines down, power poles across the street, trees broken off, sheared off, all that's left are chimneys. It was like a ghost town.
The campfire did in the first day what the lightning complex did in several weeks. The lightning complex was about 5 weeks worth of firefighting efforts over late June and all the way through July. The campfire, 40,000 acres roughly within 6 to 8 hours, 85,000 acres by the time nightfall came.
By the time night fell on November 8th, over 50,000 people had evacuated from Paradise, Magalia, Concow, and eastern Chico. The number of structures destroyed was almost 1,000 more than in the Great Chicago Fire. An area larger than Washington, D.C. and San Francisco combined had burned in 12 hours. By the time it was extinguished 15 days later, 153,000 acres had burned. That's 75% of New York City. This is the campfire burn scar compared to Los Angeles, Atlanta, and London. 85 people had perished.
The first night, I thought we'd have at least 1,000 people deceased. I knew the demographics of the ridge. I knew how many assisted living facilities and board and cares that we had there.
I think after the 2008 fires that we had, where we'd exercised evacuations and we knew where the flaws were, we felt we fixed them and had a pretty robust evacuation plan. Fire department and law enforcement did a very good job educating people. The information was there, it was out there, and I truly believe if that wouldn't have happened, and if this fire, the campfire on November 8th would have happened in 2007, I think you would have saw hundreds of fatalities, if not in the thousands.
Even though we were probably one of the best prepared counties, we had done drills, we had done tabletop exercises, we had communicated with our residents about where to go, what is your zone for evacuation purposes, we'd pushed code red. All of those best laid plans, nothing could have compared to what actually happened.
We've been talking a lot about this in the last 11 months. There are those occasions that there's going to be events. There's absolutely nothing we as human beings can do to prevent from it happening. But we still have to prepare for it, and we need to prepare for that 99.999% of natural disasters that hit us. That small percentage that we don't know how bad it is, that's always going to be looming out there.
One of the hardest things to put into words is what it feels like to live through a disaster. How quickly everything we know changes, and how quickly we adapt. Part of it is this. In our lives, we build up big moments. Graduations, funerals, weddings, births. There's the anticipation, the moment of excitement or stress, and then things return to a norm we're familiar with. That's because normal is often associated with going home after it all. When disaster happens, home is gone. Feeling normal is months or years away. But in Butte County, even with their plans overwhelmed, the guidelines of the disaster plans still helped house thousands of survivors on that first day.
There's calculations in emergency management that you estimate whatever the population is, that you would expect 10% of that population to show up on the doorstep of a shelter. And then of that 10%, then you estimate a particular percentage of individuals who would come with access and functional needs. And we use a formula, and we have a tool, planning tool that we utilize. And it calculates how many cots you'll need, how many meals you'll need, what kind of space you need. There's actually requirements for how many square feet you need per person. So the first 24 hours is just, as you can imagine, chaotic. About 9:30, the first shelter had been opened. And so then I was tasked with opening up additional shelters, getting resources requested and getting them into place, and dealing with everything related to the evacuation. So there were a total of 12 that were open within the first 24 hours. Some of those were county sponsored, some of them were what we call spontaneous shelters. And oftentimes in those spontaneous sheltering situations, they are churches or businesses who want to open their doors, but they're not necessarily trained. And so then over time, we try to support them, whether that be in the form of food or cots or bedding, whatever it is that they need, but not always. And then over time, during the course of an incident, we will try to support those spontaneous shelters in closing, and then we'll relocate those survivors to a more formal shelter, one that's managed by Red Cross and operated in conjunction with either a church or the county.
Among those looking for someplace to stay was Bob Irvine from California Vocations, his 50 clients and 200 employees. Like everybody else, Bob was using the elements of his pre-disaster plan to improvise a way to safety.
The plan was two things. One, to start securing hotel rooms in the area, and then two, we'll do a rendezvous at the fairgrounds down in Chico, so we'll all get together. Unfortunately, we didn't realize the emergency response units kind of used the fairgrounds for their site, so they weren't letting anybody there. Our rendezvous site was not available, and so we were all communicating via cell phone. Where are you? Where are you? And a large group of us went out to Woodson Bridge, to the campground there. One of our managers, Arlene Cruz, was very familiar with that property and the owners, and they took us in. So whoever couldn't find a hotel ended up going to Woodson Bridge. And there was, I would say, out of the 50 clients, there was probably 20 clients there. And the others were able to secure hotel rooms, but we were spread out all throughout Northern California. We were in Yuba City, we were in Corning, we were in Anderson. It was a realization that this situation was not sustainable, and it was bigger than us. So at that point in time, I sent an email to every elected official that I knew, county, state, United States, and said, pleading for help. We had the 50 clients, we had 250 employees, and who knows what our properties burnt.
This was Bob's version of a common survivor experience. You don't just lose things, you lose where you live, your security. Of the tens of thousands who came off the ridge during the fire, roughly 5,200 were being housed in public shelters spread from Yuba City to Redding. Hundreds more in spontaneous shelters, while tens of thousands more fleeing survivors were spread in homes of friends, family, hotel rooms paid by private insurance or FEMA, from Medford to Fresno, the Bay Area to Reno. I know families who fled as far away as Idaho, Texas, Georgia, and Florida to find friends with which to stay. One of the people Bob reached out to was Doug Teeter, the county supervisor for the Paradise Ridge. Teeter himself had nearly perished the morning of November 8th, along with a group of stranded motorists on Pearson Road. When they escaped, Teeter made his way to the EOC, where he saw Bob's call for help and responded.
And it was Doug Teeter, actually, that called me back first, saying he's working with Shelby Boston. 10 minutes later, she called me, and she said, Bob, I've got a county supervisor over in Colusa County that has offered up a 42-unit migrant housing camp, and it's got 42 duplexes. Would you be willing to use those as your shelter? I just couldn't believe it. It was amazing. I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for Shelby Boston.
After a few days, after like the first 3 days, then you start to have all these other things that pop up during a disaster. So we had spontaneous shelter at the Walmart parking lot we were contending with. We had just the different things that happen in shelters. You know, challenges with toilets and challenges with norovirus outbreaks. Things that happen when you have hundreds of people living in close quarters and you're just going through that every day is what's going to be the new challenge for today. Do you have someone who's become really ill, a survivor who needs special attention?
Emergency Manager Dunsmore tried to put it into context like this.
In past events, in our EOC, our logistics section usually receives resource requests in 100, maybe 150 for things that are needed out in the field. In the campfire, we received between 2,500 and 3,000 resource requests.
I gave several tours to different groups, whether it was FEMA or ACF or CDC. Every tour I provided, every conversation I had with anyone who lives and breathes emergency management, they all said the same thing, that that the level of destruction was something they'd never seen before. To have an entire town, with the exception of 1,300 homes, to be gone in a matter of hours was just unheard of. When we were talking about the impacts of the fire, that it was really akin to the 1906 earthquake. That people who survived the 06 earthquake, that became a part of who they are, became their life story, a chapter in it at least. And that the campfire has become a chapter in all of our lives. While it wasn't the biggest fire ever in the history of California, it was the most destructive. And it was 155,000 acres, which there's bigger fires. But the fatality rate, the just mass destruction, it's pretty unbelievable.